The Earth breathes. During spring, carbon emissions in the atmosphere decrease due to the absorption of carbon dioxide by new growth and the oceans. During autumn, the leaves fall from the trees and carbon emissions increase as they decay. The system was in balance until the Industrial Revolution introduced more carbon than can be absorbed. Carbon emissions are produced every day through driving cars, purchasing electricity produced from coal or gas, and generating waste. This has led to a buildup of carbon emissions in our atmosphere, causing an increase in global temperature, known as global warming or climate change. Climate change is getting worldwide attention, featuring daily in the media, piquing the interest of all generations. To combat this phenomena, many businesses are aiming to achieve net zero carbon emissions. This means achieving a balance between emissions produced and emissions taken out of the atmosphere. The journey towards achieving net zero involves measuring how much carbon your business is using and producing, reducing energy consumption as much as possible, switching to renewably sourced electricity, offsetting your carbon footprint. If you can't measure it, you can't change it. It's important to establish your benchmark. Carbon emissions are reduced through simple actions, like taking greater control over your energy usage, ensuring it is only being used when and where it's needed, and upgrading to more energy-efficient equipment in offices and factories. Electricity can be obtained from renewable sources such as solar, wind and hydro, which can now be generated on site or purchased through the electricity grid. Any remaining emissions can be cancelled out by purchasing carbon offsets to fund renewable projects, for example tree planting, native reforestation and renewable energy projects. Is your business interested in achieving net zero carbon emissions? Energy Action partners with businesses to transition them towards a net zero future. Find out how. Contact us today on 1300 964 589.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Energy Action and our webinar today. I'm really excited about this webinar. It's a very special one. My name's Andy Young. I'm the General Manager of Business Services here, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. You won't be hearing too much from me. I'll be having a look at the questions that are coming in. I'm just about to throw over to Ed, Hanna, and Bianca Nogrady. And they will introduce themselves. So welcome to both of you. Today's webinar is titled Achieving Net Zero at Least Cost. This is something that has been, you've been hearing a lot of recently, particularly in the news, and we're really excited to be presenting this. We have an hour set aside for today, around about 40 minutes for the presentation, and we've allowed about 20 minutes for questions. So I'd like to encourage everybody. There's a question and answer part on the webinar you'll find somewhere there. Encourage you to type your questions in there. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can. We may, if something particularly good comes up, we'll interrupt and throw to the guys for that. But other than that, we might hold some back until the end as well. So I'm going to throw over now to Ed, Hanna, and let's get the webinar going.
Get the show on the road. Thank you very much, Andy. And I'm going to take the opportunity before I introduce Bianca just to welcome everybody to Energy Action, everyone that's joined us this morning. Today, as Andy said, it's another in our series of webcasts, and it's going to be the first of our podcasts designed to assist businesses around Australia to achieve net zero at least cost. For those of you who may be new to Energy Action, just a little bit about us. We work with Chief Procurement Officers, Chief Financial Officers, energy managers, and business owners and leaders. We support them to define their net zero trajectory and to set their goals, and then support their organisations to make the right decisions to reach their net zero goals at least cost. We're very excited here at Energy Action this week, not just because we have Bianca Nogrady in the house, but because we are preparing for the launch of a new energy market product, which we think will make net zero energy procurement a lot more accessible for our clients, commercial and industrial energy buyers. It's going to reduce transaction costs and take out a lot of the risks of long-term PPAs, which have been the flavour of the month for a while. We call our vehicle the Renewable Energy Supply Agreement, and it will be accessed via a green auction hosted on our platform, and it bundles the supply of low-cost energy and renewable energy certificates that can be surrendered to support a reportable Scope 2 net zero achievement. So it's pretty effective. Reportable is important. We're reviewing this week as well the discussion paper from the Federal Clean Energy Regulator, which states pretty clearly that a standalone market-side PPA does not meet its criteria for a reportable net zero achievement. But more on that later. Back to the matter at hand. Today, I have the pleasure of the company of a special guest, Bianca Nogrady. Bianca is a prolific science writer, most famous in my house because Bianca is the go-to when Dr. Carl goes on holidays on Triple J. So when the going gets tough, the ABC turns to Bianca to present his science program. Bianca has written some fabulous books. I don't use that word often, but they are fabulous books across a range of interesting topics. I read a very interesting one a few years ago on the subject of death and dying, and more recently, another little topic, how we as a society, globally and locally, can act to mitigate climate change. Bianca's new book, Climate Change, How We Can Get to Net Zero, will be released as an e-book later this month.
March 25th.
March 25th, and it will be in hard copy in Australia in July. Okay, fantastic. I've read it. I've got a pirate copy. It's highly accessible. It's written with a lot of passion and energy, and it's very well researched. The other thing that's really notable about it, about it, Bianca, is that it projects a lot of optimism, which I found personally to be a good shot in the arm. Bianca, can you tell us a bit about the journey you took in writing the book?
Well, it was interesting because this book is part of a series of books that Wired UK has put out, which are intended to be pocket guides. So they're relatively short, and they cover a whole range of topics. And they approached me and said, we want to do one about climate change, and you've got 25,000 words. And I kind of fell off my chair and sat up and went, no, that's not really going to work. So we had to narrow it down to something that was a little bit more bite-sized. And so we really settled on the notion of focusing on carbon as a kind of a proxy for environmental harm, a proxy for so many of the other things that we can't necessarily fit into 25,000 words. And it also makes it an easy marker of action, is reducing carbon emissions. Obviously, it's only part of the solution, but it's a very big part of the solution. So writing this book kind of broke me because not only was it very, very difficult, but it's also the challenge of trying to really get across the vast spectrum of what it means to decarbonize and looking at every aspect of life. And so the book is broken down into energy technology, which is an obvious one, energy use. It looks at food, which is another huge one, transport, waste, which pretty much covers, it's been, waste is the problem that got us here in the first place, namely we're wasting a resource, which is carbon, and then also looks at carbon markets and also negative emissions technology. So how can we actually reduce our carbon or even do something more useful with it? So it was incredibly difficult to write, but it was also incredibly encouraging because it made me realize how many of the solutions we have. I mean, we have the answers. Technology has the answers. Markets have the answers. Human beings have the answers. We're just not necessarily acting on them fast enough. And a lot of that blame, I think, could be laid at the feet of government. But I think what gave me hope, I'm sorry if there are any government listeners, but need to do more. But what did give me hope was actually how much is being done by business. And I've been writing on the environment for a while, and I recall when Trump was elected and a huge number of American businesses joined this conglomeration called We Mean Business, and the We Are Still In campaign. And that's something that came out again and again in this book, is that business is really walking the walk, talking the talk and walking the walk on this. And that is fantastic. I think that's really gave me great hope. And I think government will come to the table on that as well as things progress.
Oh, thank you very much, Bianca. Look, we're going to just quickly unpack, I guess, in dollar terms, some of the financial measures, if you like, of climate change. Then we might circle back on some of the science, and then I'm going to try and ask you a bunch of questions. So, look, here's an estimate from, I have to admit, I forgot the name of the institute, out of Melbourne, but they've estimated Australia's potential climate change damages. It's going to cost us $585 billion by the year 2030. It's a big number. There's lots of zeros there. And the next number is also very big, but it stands in contrast. It's an order of magnitude smaller. The costs of effectively reducing climate change across our economy. These are some numbers produced very early last year. The Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute has estimated about $36 billion. I guess we're at a point too where we can all talk openly about the urgency of acting now, and we can talk with knowledge and understanding of how the cost of not acting is going to see that 35.5 billion no doubt grow, and probably that 600 billion grow as well. A sort of call to action that resonated with me that I picked up earlier this year was some comments from Larry Fink, the BlackRock co-founder, investor extraordinaire, Mr. Wall Street. There's no company whose business model won't be profoundly affected by the transition to a net zero economy. And I think that's a theme that I really want to explore today. And specifically what we're going to try and communicate or debate and talk about today, Bianca, is the most cost-effective way for organisations to achieve net zero. As a starting point, though, as we get into some of the science, I'm going to ask you, what do you've unpacked for us the cause of the problem comes back to waste of resources, and specifically when we talk about climate change, we can sheet a lot of that back to carbon. I'm going to just run through a bit of terminology very quickly, ask you to chip in when you can, but look, net zero, it's a phrase that came out of the Paris Accord. It's I guess a call to action, really, for individuals and organisations to work towards a target where there are no net carbon emissions across society. It's an interesting term in that it acknowledges that society and an economy has to work in concert. We are going to have positive carbon producers, but as you've acknowledged, there are opportunities for negative carbon producers out there as well. The focus, obviously, man-made carbon and greenhouse gas emissions becoming eliminated first. And there's a well-established pathway. It's a pathway that we've embedded into our business as our approach to net zero. And quite simply, you eliminate the emissions that you're responsible for, and then you look to offset the remaining balance and work through your supply chain.
I might actually jump in here and just point out that, I mean, when we're talking about the net zero to stay below a 2-degree increase in temperature, we currently sit at approximately a 1-degree increase above pre-industrial levels. And if you look at the effect that is having on environments around the world, we've had catastrophic bushfires, we are already experiencing, I mean, severe consequences at just 1 degree. So I think when we talk about net zero, I think net zero is the absolute bare minimum that we have to be aiming for. We have to actually be aiming for less than zero. We have to be aiming for, I guess, positive carbon to the point where we are actually able to reverse back, because we're now at about 412 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We really should be trying to get back to around 280. So this is kind of the starting point, I think, of action.
Look, to that point too, you characterize in your book how quickly that change is happening, and contrast that with some other significant climate change events through the world's history, the globe's history, planet's history. Can you elaborate a little bit? We're talking about a change over a course of decades. Some of those other events that we refer to as mass extinctions, what sort of timescale were they happening in?
Well, so the only other time in the Earth's history, as far as we know, that temperatures have changed this rapidly was the extinction event that led to the demise of the dinosaurs, which was most likely, obviously, we can never be certain, but most likely caused by meteor impacts on the Earth's surface. So if we start comparing ourselves to the impact of a celestial body on our planet, you kind of gives you some sense of how much we're stuffing things up.
That's how I do think of myself.
I know, exactly. A flying lump of angry rock. So
celestial, more positive, but yeah. Okay.
Exactly. So look, there have been obviously massive fluctuations in the Earth's climate over the history of this planet, but they happen over tens of thousands and millions of years. And yes, they have been bigger. I mean, we've had global average temperatures, and there's something called the Paleocene Eocene thermal maximum, which this happened about 56 million years ago. Temperatures rose by about 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, but it caused absolutely massive species loss and huge evolutionary change. We don't really know what caused that, but it's thought to have been a huge release of methane from the sea floor. And so when people argue, oh, this has happened before, it's like, yes, it's happened, but look at the consequences of it. First of all, massive levels of extinction, but then also we live in, a world where we are exquisitely vulnerable to changes in temperature, because everything that we rely on to survive, basically food, water, and shelter, is dependent on, can exist and survive within a very narrow band of temperatures. So this is not some trivial natural cycle. This is something we have to adapt to faster than any living thing has adapted to. We have extraordinary brains. We have the capacity to adapt to this, but we don't want to adapt to it. We want to stop it happening so that we don't have to go through these huge traumas and adaptations.
There's a call to action for us all, huh? Look, when we boil down net zero and emissions in sort of reporting language as businesses, we talk in terms of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, specifically related to carbon, obviously. So scope 1, I've just put up on the screen there for everybody a couple of definitions. So direct emissions that come from energy conversion on site. So we're talking about the burning of gas, refrigerants. Scope 2, typically offsite emissions that get converted outside the boundary. And principally here, we're talking about grid supplied electricity. Then scope 3, indirect emissions. So things that happen that are that are the consequence of a site's activities, but don't take place within their control necessarily. So wastewater or other forms of waste.
And there's a lot of upstream and downstream, a huge amount. So I think there was actually Kraft, the huge food manufacturer in the US, they did an audit and found that 90% of their emissions came under scope 3 emissions. So it's everything from how people use your products and the energy that's involved in the use of the product or the disposal of the product. I mean, it's huge. It's kind of like, that is the iceberg.
That's right, and there's a big opportunity out there, but I guess your book and look at us as a business. We focus on energy. I'm going to ask you why should we start with energy when we're talking about net zero and decarbonisation?
So energy is the low-hanging fruit. This is the easiest. It's also the biggest target. So energy and heat generation accounts for approximately 1/3 of human-generated greenhouse gas emissions. So it's absolutely massive, and that covers everything from the personal, the household, up to high-end, high-heat industries. But the great thing about this is that the infrastructure and the technology to decarbonize the energy sector is well established. I mean, we're all using it. Everybody knows about it. This is not an unknown quantity. The other great thing about it is that the economic argument is overwhelming. So, for example, we talk about the global average levelized cost. So this is the cost of a power station over its lifetime divided by the amount of energy that power station produces. So whether that be, a solar farm or a nuclear power station or a coal-fired power station. And the global average levelized cost of fossil fuels is higher than just about any other renewable energy form. So for example, I think the last count, fossil fuels range from about 5 cents to around 17 cents per kilowatt hour. Hydropower is now at 4.7 cents per kilowatt hour. Solar PV is 6.8. Onshore wind is 5.3. Biofuel is in that same kind of ballpark. So this makes economic sense to be shifting across to this. In terms of why, I guess when it comes to actually buying this energy, why, presuming for some companies it's not as cheap. And again, this is where I do point the finger at government a little bit, in the sense that the system at the moment is not geared to, it makes things difficult for renewables to gain traction. So the economics of this are very, very clear. It's easy to do. It's kind of a no-brainer. I don't know why we're not doing it more.
Well, okay, let's break that down a bit in terms of what we can see here in the Australian market. I'm going to move past this slide. Perhaps we'll get the chance to come back to it. That is our template for how organisations can reduce net zero. But let's just talk about energy pricing here in Australia for a moment. What I've put on screen, guys, is the Energy Action Price Index. This is an index we've been tracking for 12 years, 14 years now, which fundamentally it's the contracts that our clients are entering into as a result of our auction processes and our transactions that we're running on our platform. What we've seen, towards the right side of this chart, you can see a couple of things. Firstly, you can see the impact of COVID. So you can see a decrease in demand for electricity through the 2020. But the other thing that we can see in there is the impact of more and more renewables, more wind and more solar. And as you say, coming in with a lower levelized cost of energy into the system. And that has having a big impact on the cost of energy in the grid. And I guess our short-term projections are that penetration of renewables is going to persist. That doesn't necessarily mean that the cost of energy that clients can contract will persist because of this tension that you just described. There's a balance that the system has to achieve. Fossil fuels are still a really important part of our energy supply mix. And they do exert a lot of control over the forward price of energy. So we'll see the tensions of that play out in the next few years.
Well, I think they're already playing out as well as when you start to look at, some of the energy companies themselves wanting to close down coal-fired power stations. But then we have government resistance to that. And this is where some of the problem comes in, is that, you get the sense that this is a kind of a dying beast that's being propped up, as opposed to, and meanwhile, there's all of these other technologies that are, raring to go and not being able to get a foothold. But I mean, the energy companies, they're profit-driven organizations. They know the writing's on the wall. It's just, again, it's that frustration. Why hasn't this changed?
That's right. Okay. I'm going to jump backwards for a sec and just put on screen, look, our steps to net zero. It starts really with goal setting, which we may get the chance to talk about. We may have to move on. Measurement is a really critical point. And look, the other thing that the electricity sector represents, it's metered. It's highly metered. It can be measured every step of the way. The emissions are published. It's a fundamentally really centralized and well-controlled network. And there is a great opportunity to drive into that to get tangible emissions reductions. A path to net zero, though, where we advise our clients is to start with reduce. What can you do with energy efficiency? What can you do to wean yourself off high carbon intensive processes? Renewable energy, what can you do on site? What can your business take advantage of? How can you invest to strengthen your business and take advantage of these low cost renewables? And then procurement, we'll try and unpack a bit today, and then you move back to offsets. working through sort of a bit of a worked example here. I want to demonstrate, this is a hypothetical, right? Based on a medium-sized business, 2.4 gigawatt hours. Let's assume they're in Victoria. 75% of their usage is daytime, working weekdays. Here's a scenario that we're seeing a lot of. They went to market in say 2018, 2019. They're coming off some pretty, through 2020, they came off some pretty high energy prices. And look, let's just point out some numbers here. $509,000 down to $401,000 is the typical saving we saw clients. We had the benefit or the joy of presenting to clients as they work through our processes to buy energy. They can bank a saving there. The other opportunity, though, is to think about how they can go to market to purchase certificates and usher in this change that we're all talking about. Here's a couple of worked examples. Green power, it's sold as a premium into the Australian market. It'll cost you, in this particular instance, $110,000. So we're talking about 25% of the energy contract costs to acquit yourself in 2021 of your emissions, your energy emissions. A more sophisticated approach, a more active approach, we could support you to purchase LGC certificates and manage a portfolio of certificate buying progressively. We'll save you some money. We'll do that more cheaply. Even more cheaply is to look at how we can aggressively work in the market to purchase energy certificates for you and take advantage of reductions in costs of those certificates. Once you've gone through that process, though, you're still, we've banked some savings, $510,000 in 2019 back to $452,000 in 2020, 2021. Most organisations don't think like that. They'll take the utility cost saving and it'll go elsewhere to their business. If you do have the opportunity, those LGC purchasing is good. But after that, there are additional opportunities to drive down your costs. So in every business, there are latent opportunities for energy efficiency and waste reduction. We typically see about a 20% opportunity. You'll have to invest to get there, but those opportunities are there. That'll strip costs out of your energy, your network costs, and your environmental, your certificates. But then you can go further with solar. And again, as we look across our portfolio of commercial industrial clients, there's a ratio typically of how much roof size we've got access to, and then the load shape, the daytime load shape of a business. We can typically acquit about 20% of a business's emissions by helping them secure an energy contract. And again, our focus is on simplicity and access. We make sure that we've got a great opportunity to, we use a reverse auction process to help our clients quickly plug into solar energy. Okay, I'm going to take the next 10 minutes, I think, to sort of work through our pillars and throw to you, Bianca, some questions as to the sort of trends you're seeing and reporting in your book across the economy. So what we're going to work through is kind of a current state, future state, what we can see, and then I'll throw to you to say, hey, what's happening? So look, in the measurement and metering space, it's all about fluid access to integrated data. We're seeing organisations wrestle with this. We're developing solutions that we're very excited that leverage our 15-year-old footprint in the space. But we see our clients working across multiple systems and very manual. It's a slow process. Moving forward, that digitization of the economy is happening so fast. There's just so many opportunities out there. What are you seeing as you put your book together in the measurement and?
Well, I think a lot of it is, so I remember that there was, because it's not all about electricity use, it's also just other resource usage. So for example, if you operate a fleet of vehicles, how efficiently are those being deployed? If you have any delivery service, and I remember there was it was a kind of sort of a AI-driven optimization engine that was trying to look at ways to actually dispatch drivers based on the driver's location, so that they would minimize the amount of travel that these drivers were doing, therefore reducing their fuel intake. And so a lot of it is really looking for, like, there's not necessarily a lot of low-hanging fruit in energy efficiency. It's really looking for the small wins, looking for the areas. So, you know, I always love this notion, or hate it, I guess, vampire power. You know, this idea that we have so many devices on standby mode, so many lights on standby mode in offices which are, you know, unoccupied. And I think we've gone a long way towards not doing that, but it's still not far enough. And you know, in some, like an average household, when I was writing about this, and this was 10 years ago, I mean, this kind of nighttime power consumption was costing around $100 a year per household, which doesn't sound like a lot. But then when you look at that from a business perspective, that probably does start to impact your bottom line. I mean, the other thing that I think is really interesting as well around that notion of efficiency is looking for the waste. Where is the waste happening? And there was a fantastic example in Stockholm, where they're home to a lot of massive data parks, server farms, because it's cold. Stockholm and Sweden have a very high percentage of renewable energy supply, in fact, so they can also provide renewable electricity to these companies. And they also have this incredible district heating system in Stockholm. So it's a huge network of pipes that carry heated water, and that's used to heat large parts of the city. And so what they did was they created these data parks where they basically buy waste heat from the tenants, from these data farms, so that the data farms, not only are they getting renewable energy, but they are actually getting paid for their waste heat, which is then fed into Stockholm's district heating network. So they're effectively operating without any cost at all for their electricity. So there's an example of waste. And I mean, server farms are really good because you have such a concentration of heat, and you know, operating them requires a lot of electricity just to cool them down, which seems absolutely crazy that we're doing that. Yeah. And I think it's even Amazon has there's a building in Paris that uses waste heat from one of the big tech companies' data server farms. So it's, you know, it's finding those areas of waste where we could be doing things so much more efficiently, using technology, for example, like AI and machine learning and these optimization engines that do the hard work for you, that work out where you're kind of, you know, hemorrhaging energy and therefore hemorrhaging money.
Yeah, look, I agree. And look, there's two sort of really, I guess, key themes in those scenarios that you're describing. One is that, you know, looking for those opportunities to optimize, and you know, it's almost a reverse, you know, completely change the way you're thinking about your problem. You know, there's an opportunity there if you approach it the right way. The other thing that always strikes me in this conversation is the solutions are, by definition, local. You know, there's a lot of good templates. There's a lot of examples of creative thinking, but the solution that works in Stockholm is not going to work in Sydney. The opportunities that exist in Sydney are very different. And look, the opportunities that I drew out of your book, obviously, solar is a fantastic opportunity here in Australia, loads and loads of sunshine, a fair bit of space. But we're also hearing more and more noise about positioning around, around a hydrogen economy.
Yeah, hydrogen is really, really interesting. So it's kind of complex because it's not only, it's a fuel in itself, but it's also a means of energy storage. So, you know, if we look at, I mean, most people would think of hydrogen, probably think of it as in the context of transport. So for example, you know, hydrogen, we've got hydrogen powered trains and buses and trucks that are already rolling out all across Europe. Hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles are very, very common in Europe. Not so much here, but in Australia, it does offer a way for companies, or not even companies, energy independence. You know, you can actually use it as a storage mechanism for your electricity, so that then you burn the hydrogen in a fuel cell, generate the electricity at night when it's not being generated by the renewables. But it's a huge opportunity for energy independence for countries that do have access to a lot of natural resources in the sense that are variable, like wind and solar, that where you can actually generate huge amounts of electricity from that and potentially even export. And certainly the chief scientist, or the previous chief scientist, Dr. Alan Finkel, I mean, he authored a kind of a hydrogen roadmap for Australia. And again, you know, Australia could be a net exporter of energy if we can actually convert our wind and solar and also potentially tidal and wave resources into hydrogen. We can then actually export that to countries like Japan, who are really investing in the hydrogen economy. So there's a lot happening in hydrogen that is very, very exciting, because it is, and when I say hydrogen, I've got to specify this is green hydrogen. This is not hydrogen derived from stuffing around with coal. Like, just forget about that. That is a complete and utter waste of time. It's just driven by the fossil fuel industry, and it's total bollocks. So we're talking about green hydrogen. We're talking about a means to actually store and transport renewable energy.
Yeah, and look, I picked up the Boyer lectures earlier this year. Twiggy Forrester, leader of the Fortescue business, let's just call him that, calling out that he's going to throw his balance sheet, huge balance sheet, at green hydrogen. You know, he's talking up a 10-year plan for green hydrogen for steel manufacture in Australia.
Look, it's huge. I mean, the high heat industries, there's a lot of interest in using hydrogen for steel manufacture, which obviously Australia has a lot of investment in that industry. But what's also really interesting is the possibility of, like moving a little bit into transport. I mean, the marine, there's not really many options to decarbonize shipping freight. One of the options is to actually convert to hydrogen fuel cells for ships. And there's a lot of really neat reasons why that can work spectacularly well. But what it means is that any nation with a coastline could potentially become a refueling stop for global freight, for global shipping. And so a lot of these countries like Dubai, which currently has really positioned itself as a transport hub for air travel, which is not really going to survive long term, at least technologically speaking, they could actually now position themselves as being a refueling hub and use their solar resources and their wind to actually generate liquid hydrogen.
Yeah, look back to the Australian context and for our clients and our audience today, you know, the hydrogen economy is half a generation, maybe 10 years away. You know, in the meantime, you know, sort of behind the meter renewable energy, let's focus on for a moment, is really all about solar, and then the storage solution. Today it's lithium, and I guess to a lesser extent lead acid. It's a bit on the nose, but the hydrogen fuel cell, as you described, looks like it's going to come pretty quickly. We've seen in that space, we've been working in a long time. We've had a couple of cracks at trying to get the business model right to support our clients to get into solar markets. We think we've nailed it. As that market has matured over the last couple of years, we're now supporting reverse auctions, which for solar installs and behind the meter PPAs, which just take a lot of the complexity for getting into a good solar arrangement, a good solar project away. Back to your earlier points about levelized cost of energy too, I just wanted to make the point on some of the prices that we're seeing in this space. You know, we're seeing behind the meter PPAs, which are going to help a business avoid, you know, 12, 14, 15 cents per kilowatt hour for delivered energy into their site. We're seeing prices at, you know, 7 cents per kilowatt hour up to about 12 cents, 13 cents a kilowatt hour.
That's incredibly, I mean, that's competitive and lower than fossil fuels. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, you need term for that. You can't get into that on a short deal, but on a long-term deal, that is a way to profoundly impact your net zero journey and your carbon footprint. You know, 20, maybe 30, 40% of your load can be offset by rooftop, and batteries is a path to de-risking that investment as those battery costs come down and as the grid prices change.
There's also, I guess, a shift, this move towards decentralizing energy and microgrids, which, I mean, I don't necessarily know how those would operate in a business context as so much, but perhaps Ed, you could talk about that. But certainly, you know, in the domestic market, you know, I live in Blackheath, which is a pretty small town. We have a lot of instability in the power network. You know, every time there's a storm, the whole thing goes down. So, you know, we know that, and so much energy is lost in transmission. Around 10% of electricity is lost in transmission. So if we have these kind of networked microgrids where every house has a solar panel, they've all got smart meters, they can buy and sell into the grid at competitive prices, it can actually be a miniature market. That is also a model that enables particularly small towns that are a long way from the grid, like we have a lot of those in Australia, to not only maintain stability but to do so in a competitive way, and everybody has buy-in.
Look, and there's two models that we're seeing emerge in that space. One is necessitated by the rules of the market. It's led by the larger energy retailers. They're deploying kind of experiments, I think, at the moment for virtual power plants to connect users and string batteries and controls together. And there's some interesting things happening in that space. The other model, though, again, it's coming from our clients, developers with a precinct. Right? There's no property boundaries to cross. They can establish their own network within the precinct. And our focus is actually on the opportunity that exists there. There's an energy arbitrage, an energy margin. You can build that network more cheaply than the monopolized power companies can. And you can enjoy the benefits of buying power from the grid more cheaply, producing power on site, delivering renewable power to your stakeholders and your occupants, and return a benefit to your P&L.
And it makes the grid so much more resilient. I mean, you look at the power failures, for example, that happened in the US recently with the storms in Texas, and admittedly there are complicating factors there, but we have experienced something similar in Australia, in South Australia. But when you have these decentralized grids, it gives you so much more stability on the network, which if your business really is very, very dependent on that stability, that's also attractive.
Okay, look, I'm getting the wind up from our moderator. I thought he was here to just stop us fighting, but he's apparently here to watch the clock.
Here to crack the whip.
I don't know if you're seeing many Q&A questions come in, Andy. Great, okay. Well, look, we just might just make a nod to procurement before we move on. We are seeing what we think is a pretty fundamental shift, certainly at the top end of town, from enterprises looking to take a leadership position and purchase, make a procurement decision which will support a net zero statement. And look, everybody on our call today is one way or another involved in energy purchasing. I picked up something on one of our partners' blogs through the week that made the statement that the Chief Procurement Officer has the opportunity to become a hero of decarbonisation. Okay, the standards that a procurement officer will set will literally drive the market.
Well, you're voting with your wallet. I mean, that's a huge amount of power for change.
Yeah, that's right. And look, we've long understood procurement as a social scientist. To be a great procurement manager, you've got to be an economist, a technologist, a policy expert, a logistics expert. But we're now seeing it's an opportunity to be a social activist, to really drive change in an organisation and through a society and an economy. The challenge, though, and maybe we can talk about this in another webinar. I know we've got one coming up, Andy, to the Procurement Association of Australia, is understanding the frameworks of net zero reporting. If you understand those frameworks, you will make better informed decisions about what to demand from your suppliers. What's greenwash and what is a genuine action. The risk, though, for any procurement manager is to go too far. What we encourage our people we're talking to, our clients, to do is by all means, it's really important that you make a firm commitment, but a good procurement strategy will see you retain flexibility and optionality, and I guess, and also, to be able to transact effectively. And we are, I mentioned earlier, we're launching our renewable energy supply agreement to market this month. We're very excited about that because we think it strikes the right balance between a medium-term commitment. You can get into these for 2 to 5 years and follow the energy market price and report back to that. But at the same time, it gives you optionality over the longer term to ensure you've got the right pricing, you've got the right counterparty to deal with, you've got the flexibility in a renewable energy supply agreement too, to manage your own trajectory down.
And I think also with procurement, I mean, obviously your focus is on energy, but I think it's also very important to think about all the other things that you procure, the products that you procure, and certainly when Australia's sort of recycling crisis, which we're still kind of in the thick of, one of the very strong messages coming from the recycling industry is that recycling it's not enough just to chuck it in the yellow bin. You actually have to be buying those products back. So if we had mandated procurement of renewably sourced goods. So, for example, if roads were built using ground glass, instead of sand, if we were actually taking those products that we throw into our recycling bins, either household or company, and actually buying those back, that is where you actually affect change. It's not enough to throw it out. If you're just putting it in your bin, you're not doing anything more than chucking it in landfill. So, which literally is what is the problem. We were throwing it overseas. We weren't doing anything with it. Yeah. So there's a huge opportunity for Australia to develop a recycling industry that does actually create new products from our own materials as opposed to sending them overseas, where other companies are taking advantage of those opportunities.
Well, yeah, look, and I know in my house, where I'm the second in command procurement officer, organisations that can satisfy us that there is a recycling opportunity at the end of the product journey. IKEA is a good example, right? Then that's very well regarded in procurement decisions.
And some companies like Patagonia, you look at what Patagonia is doing with clothes, they're really world leaders in this. Yeah. It's fantastic.
So with 15 minutes to go, Ed, how many more slides have you got?
Well, look, why don't I take the opportunity to close out a little bit, and then let's move into some Q&A. Andy, is that
sounds like a
Can I just throw a very quick mention of offsets? Because one thing I just
skimmed over that.
I know we skimmed over offsets. Offsets are the last resort. If once all other options are exhausted. But one thing I'd like to mention with offset is that it's not don't just look at this as a way of kind of buying yourself out of your carbon guilt. Look at how to make your dollar go further. Look at boutique carbon. Look at blue carbon. Look at carbon that actually adds to biodiversity. So blue carbon is a fantastic example, because it's restoring coastal ecosystems which store huge amounts of carbon. They also are nurseries for a lot of commercially important fish species. You're restoring biodiversity in these really important wetlands in Australia. So, your dollar is going so much further than simply offsetting your carbon guilt. So that's probably just one thing I really wanted to throw in there about offsetting.
Oh, it's a great statement. Look, too, offsets have a place, right? There's no company, two things, right? You mentioned earlier, 90% of the opportunity is probably in your supply chain. And so you'll have to, one way or t'other, value chain, supply chain, wrestle with that. The other point too, I think that's important to make, is organisations acting alone can't do this. There is the need to work with others, and offsets facilitates that cooperation. Okay. Look, the opportunities today, just to make some pragmatic recommendations to our audience today, a couple of things that we see that are important. Take the opportunity to lock in, I shouldn't say long term, I should say medium term, low retail fixed prices, and bundled with your certificates. LGCs are the gold standard for Scope 2 electricity offsets, and the RESA, as I mentioned before, is a great way to access the market. It's not the only way. PPAs, long-term PPAs, and also LGC transactions are another way to access that market, and we can help our clients do that. Solar supply, have a look at our reverse auction capability. We've seen that market mature to a point where there is probably 24 highly credible project providers across the country. We're working with all of them, and we're seeing some great benefits when we let the market work through our platform and lower costs. The other point, we didn't get to chat about it, but we're also seeing in that measurement and metering space a bit of a rationalisation going on. If you haven't done so already, let's start a conversation about how to lower your metering costs. Okay.
All right. So let's thank you very much for that, Ed and Bianca. That was really interesting. I found myself actually very very interested as well. Thank you to those of you who have put some questions in. So let's start with a couple of them. First of all, I will mention though that there is a slide about a free tool that is going to be coming out with the with the webinar, which we will distribute to everybody, but we'll come to that. Right, so let's have a couple of questions.
And that's our cue too, to say, buy Bianca's book. It's going to be great.
Yes, Climate Change, How We Can Get to Carbon Zero. It's published by Wired and Random House Business.
And we'll send out a link on where to buy that as well, of course. Thank you, Bianca. All right, let's start with first question. As a customer, do I need to buy green power, or will the grid become green or carbon neutral anyway with all these renewables?
It's a great question. Can I have first crack at that?
Please do.
Well, actually,
no, that one's yours.
Okay, let me answer that. Okay, two things there, right? The short answer is it depends on what statement and claim that you as an organization want to make. That's the pragmatic answer to that. If your focus is on decarbonising your business, then there is an opportunity for you to ride the curve down fundamentally. We mentioned earlier that we're seeing more renewables come into the network, into the grid, and over the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, the grid will significantly decarbonise as a result of that. A couple of things that are important here. One, I'm referring to a CSIRO forecast that was done in 2018, I believe, and they were saying the New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, so let's call it the Eastern Seaboard, the grid in these states by 2040 should be about half as carbon intensive as it is now. So, we're talking about 400 kilograms per megawatt hour consumed at your end, Mr. Customer, Miss Customer. So that's the first point. Second point is what's going to deliver that is going to be a vibrant renewable energy certificate market. Two things: we can see the cost of renewables coming down to the levelized cost of existing fossil fuel-based generation fleet and even get cheaper. But we're also seeing investors respond to the continued demand for large-scale generation certificates, which, as I mentioned before, are the gold standard for reducing your emissions in relation to your scope 2, your electricity consumption. An LGC gets created when you produce a megawatt hour of renewable energy. And here's my second point. If your goal is to become 100% renewable, which a lot of organizations have taken that on, then there is a requirement for you to purchase LGCs. And LGCs directly related to your electricity consumption is what you need to be able to represent to make a credible net zero reduction claim.
All right, thanks for that, Ed. Okay, so another question: how can a business look at solar and efficiency without obligation so we can find out if it's a viable saving strategy for our company?
That's a good question, Andy. Look, the path to our solar procurement process, the reverse auction solar process I described earlier, delivered through, and I'm going to just doff my cap here to our technology partner, Beam Solar. The path to that starts with a feasibility study, which we can generate on our platform very, very quickly, very cost effectively. We'll do that for you. And second step is to get initial offers. A step we will facilitate on a no cost, no obligation basis to get you a real price. From that point, through our process, you're free to accept an offer for energy from our initial offers, and we've seen clients do that because they're just, a 99 kilowatt system is a $66,000 purchase now. It can be signed off on an individual's desk, and we're also seeing clients go through our reverse auction process to get the audit trail, but also to let the power of the market drive down that cost.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Ed. So another question. We've got time for a few more, so that's okay. So a question here from Chris. He says, hi, if the last stage of the cycle is offsetting, what is the view on what is going to happen regarding pricing of those certificates as more participants seek access to a limited pool of credits? And you seem to only be able to buy annual credits and therefore exposed to volatility annually.
Well, that's probably getting into a level of detail about carbon markets that I don't necessarily have an understanding of, but I don't think there is the market will demand will drive supply. So the more people who are seeking to purchase these offsets, then the more opportunities will present themselves, and particularly, you know, when you start looking at a lot of, for example, farmers in Australia who are looking at carbon farming as a source of income, and they're diversifying to protect themselves against, you know, climate variability, ironically enough. More and more of them are actually now looking to be able to sell carbon offsets into the market to actually secure income. So I think the opportunities will increase. I certainly have never heard of any situation where people can't buy offsets. I think there's projects large and small and across a huge range that make that accessible.
Yeah, look, I'll just jump in on the back of that. You know, we retain a trading desk here, and we're actively assisting our clients to forward trade for certificates. So yes, certainly to your point, Chris, there is volatility in certificate prices. We track it very closely in relation to the LGCs. Scott and the team here are working with a lot of our clients to forward purchase and fundamentally hedge the price of those certificates in later years.
All right, and in the vein of green power pricing, reflecting on your options costing table example, do you have a view of when the price of green power purchase may cross over with grid such that green power becomes cheaper?
I'll have a crack at answering that one. The way the green power market works is it's always going to be a premium to black energy. Can I call it black energy? I think I can.
Dirty energy.
It's sold as a value add. It's sourced from those large scale generation certificates, those LGCs I mentioned earlier. What we are seeing in that LGC market, though, is beyond about 2025, the cost of a large scale generation certificate is collapsing at the moment. It's down to about $8 a megawatt hour, which is about 0.08 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a pretty small premium if you're looking out that far to make your green power purchase. And again, you know, our team would love to help you get into those contracts. We're seeing that price collapse fundamentally because of supply and demand. The LGCs are written against a target, an obligation that the energy retailers have to surrender certificates in line with a government mandated target. And we're basically about 4 years ahead of target, I think, across the economy, because solar and wind is just making so much sense in this country.
Well, I think in 2/3 of the world's population, solar and wind are the cheapest form of electricity available. So, you know, this isn't academic anymore. This is actually just an economic reality around the world.
All right, thanks for that, Bianca. And Ed, thank you very much. I did have one more question I was going to throw, but I think we're pretty much out of time. We're at 11:29. So, Ed, did you want to use that final slide to close out?
I will. I've just got up on screen a little bit about us for our listeners, our audience. Energy Action, currently supporting thousands of businesses to deliver on their net zero ambitions, decades of experience. And we're building out, we have an integrated technology platform. We're constantly evolving that. We're looking forward to making some announcements in regards to that this year to help our clients improve their decision making. The But the other thing I'm going to plug again, yeah, you're absolutely right, Andy. That's why you're here. The Renewable Energy Supply Agreement, as I mentioned before, it'll be traded on our auction platform. We're working with a number of energy retailers now on the structure of that contract, and fundamentally what we're bringing to market there is a simple way for clients to transact to secure an energy contract, a low-cost energy contract, and a renewable certificates LGC supply as well, to ensure that they can make their reporting in pursuit of their net zero goals. Okay. Look, as a little thank you for attending, everybody. Thank you, Bianca. We'll find a bottle of wine for you. No, I'm sure there's a beautiful gesture coming your way, but thank you everybody else for attending. We'd love to help you guys take action. Our team will send out a copy of our net zero planner, which goes back to our pillars, which underpin the approach to delivering net zero and decarbonisation. And our guys will be in touch to support that process. The other thing, we'll do some giveaways, I'm sure, as the book actually hits the market, but we'd like to encourage all of you to pre-order Bianca's book, Climate Change, How We Can Get to Carbon Zero.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Bianca. What a great webinar. I think that was really good. There was one question I wanted to close out with, and it's sort of where we started from, apart from Bianca raping it up, saying that the book nearly broke her, which sort of stuck in my mind. Bianca always also made the comment about Scope 2 emissions. And she said, and my question is, if they're the easiest to deal with, why is it so hard?
I actually, well, in terms of your electricity, you know, if it's a low-hanging fruit, why is it so hard? I don't know, and this is what I find kind of frustrating, and why I do, you know, side-eye at, shall we say, regulation of the electricity market in Australia. Why isn't it cheaper? Why isn't it easier? It should be. It's a no-brainer, and I don't know. I really, really don't know, but I sincerely hope that the political winds will start to blow due renewable pretty damn soon, because we'll run out of time.
Yeah, look, I'm gonna just make some observations about that, Andy. We saw Energy Australia announced last week that your lawn will be withdrawn from the market. You know, it's a monster generator. You probably know the nameplate capacity of that one.
1,400 megawatts.
1,400 megawatts, which is what, 10% of Victoria or something like that. 10% of the total load of Victoria. It feels like a pretty well managed process today. You know, it's 3 years notice, I believe, that they've given the market in relation.
2028, so 7 years.
7 years notice, thank you. Yep, 7 years. I forgot where I was, 2021. I
think in WA as well, wasn't when WA's biggest fossil fuel powered energy company is closing or has gone belly up, you know, 5 years earlier than was predicted, because the market's kind of collapsed because of the uptake of solar and rooftop solar. I could be wrong on that, but there was some definite moves happening a lot earlier than people thought they would.
That's right. And look, we'll see the market challenge to respond to that. That's a lot of load which will come out, you know, on the flick of a switch on a certain day, albeit in 7 years' time. So the response to that, you know, we know that that solar and wind will jump in. We know that there'll be significant storage put together. It'll be interesting to see exactly how the market rules, the drivers of energy security and reliability, the need for cost-effective energy across the economy, how that all meshes together to solve that particular problem.
I think it's also worth remembering that Nicholas Stern, who did the Stern Review back in whenever it was 2008, I mean, he called climate change the greatest market failure the world has ever seen. And so I think to address a market failure, you need market solutions, and you know, supply and demand is a pretty straightforward one. If we demand renewable energy, then the supply will rise to meet that.
I kind of think that the market has kind of been helping to solve this along the way as well. We're seeing decreasing prices. Maybe the time's come. Maybe it's not as hard as what it once was, because now it's economically viable to do something. We have a look at, you know, where energy contract prices were only a few years ago, and the prices that we're seeing in the market today. People can take those savings and then invest in technology like solar panels and use those invest those savings to make a difference.
The local responses.
The local responses, once again. I think maybe the time's come. Maybe it's not quite so hard now.
It has to come. We don't have any other choice. The alternative is disaster. We don't have a choice. We have to be doing this yesterday.
Yeah. And look, our role, you know, we provide as much information as we possibly can about what's happening and the drivers. But the other thing that we're really focused on is making sure that those transactions are easy to do. You know, it shouldn't be that difficult for a business which has got a 3 to 5 year planning horizon, a whole lot of uncertainty in the longer term, to get into a sustainable renewable energy agreement.
All right, well, we'll leave that thought. And thank you very much, everybody. We are well over time. You know, best laid plans, you know, 40-minute presentation, no problem, followed by 20 minutes of questions. Well, that didn't quite work for us. But thank you very much for attending. This broadcast will be available to those of you who attended. And if you didn't attend, and you might be listening now, we're going to send you the link so you can listen to it anyway. So thank you very much. And just a reminder here as well about Bianca's book, when that comes out. I don't actually have a copy of it yet. I'm rather upset about that, but Ed being the favoured one. But I'll definitely be diving into that as well. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Ed. Thank you, Bianca.